Welcome to the Lead with Courage podcast, brought to you by Illuminate Leadership, where bold conversations spark real change. Here, we dive into the stories, insights and lessons from leaders who challenge the status quo, inspire action and lead with heart. If you're ready to grow, learn and lead with courage, you're in the right place.
Hi, I'm Cherie Canning. Illuminate Leadership acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land, which we would call this podcast the Yagara and Terrible people. We pay respect to the elders past, present, and emerging.
Hey, could I ask you a little favor? If you're enjoying the Lead with Courage podcast, could you please go and hit subscribe now? It's a small way you can support the show, and it helps us bring you even more inspiring conversations. Thanks for listening and enjoy today's episode. On today's episode, we have an Olympian joining the podcast, Toby Jenkins. He is a leadership coach, a water polo Olympic player, and an award-winning entrepreneur and author. I had the joy of sitting down with Toby to really pick his brain around the lessons learned from being an elite athlete to now transitioning into the corporate world and the importance of our emotional agility. It's a fascinating conversation around mindset and the need for flexibility. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. This is the first conversation for me in 2025 on the podcast. Toby, welcome to the Lead with Courage podcast. It is such a thrill to have you here. We always start with the first question, the same for all our guests. To kick us off, can I ask you, what does it mean to you to lead with courage?
When I saw that question, I went back to what is courage, and the Latin root of courage is heart. Core is the word, C-O-R. The Latin root is heart. I love a quote by Carl Jung, which says, your vision will only become clear when you can look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes.
How
And
beautiful.
I thought that really touches on where I sit with leading with courage, which is how do we own everything that's in our heart, not just the good stuff and the aspirational components, but also recognize that we all have fears, doubts and frustrations inevitably. And so how do we bring all of that to the table, as well as the hopes, dreams and aspirations?
Carl Jung has so many incredible pieces of wisdom, and I absolutely love that. Thank you. I remember the first time I met you, it was at the CEO Sleep Out in 2024. And actually, I met you maybe without meeting you. I saw you and heard you speak. I remember thinking, who is that guy? I need to find out who he is. What you had to say and share really inspired me. When we did this privilege walk, they called it, at the CEO Sleep Out, for those who aren't familiar, there's 200, 300 people there, and we're all talking about our experiences in life, stepping forward for the opportunities we've had and some of the hardships and tough times. And at the end, somebody had a roving mic and went to the people at the front and said, how did this feel for you? Do you remember this?
I do.
Yeah. What do you recall from your answer? Because you had the microphone in front of you in that moment.
I did, yeah. So just to enrich that context too, this is the CEO Sleep Out is about homelessness ultimately. Yeah. And for me, as I walked through that exercise, the recognition for me was really that I had grown up in enormous privilege. One of my core beliefs around that is that with privilege comes responsibility. I grew up son of two doctors, private school educated, university educated, really one of the most privileged people in the world in lots of ways, but none of which I could control. But the opportunity then becomes, okay, well, given this context, what can I do with it? And I can either choose to feel guilty about that or recognize that it's an asset or an intangible asset that I can then bring into the world and try to make a contribution and serve others and help others. To me, that's where the responsibility comes with the privilege.
Incredible. Those words you said have been something I've repeated and shared since meeting you. I'm just delighted that we have this conversation. I'd love to talk about where you are now in the roles that you do, and also a little bit about your prior life. It's still all one life, isn't it? It's all integrated.
Different chapter.
A different chapter of your life that has brought you here. And can you share a little bit about, for us, what do you think has brought you into this seat today as you sit here as an executive coach and speaker, and the work you do with so many leaders, businesses and humans? A little bit of the backstory of Toby.
You've heard a little bit already. He's born one of five children to loving parents and enormous privilege, and fell in love with this game called water polo in year 8. My sisters had both played it, and I loved swimming, and I thought, I'll give this thing a shot. Team sport, ball sport, in the water. That's my happy
What's
place.
not to love?
Launched into that and realized that I did love it, had some talent for it, and then pursued it as hard as I could. Ended up playing 3 world championships in Olympic Games, won a national title here in Australia. It was a real journey as an athlete. My first Australian team was in year 10, and my last one was 2005 in the world championship team. It was an extraordinary chapter of really trying to answer the question, how good could I be? And of course, how that laddered into a team. What contribution could I make? And I think it's actually an interesting one when I now meet with leaders and teams. One of the pieces that often gets left out of the sporting analogy, which is limited in a business setting because it's not a zero-sum game, is that whilst you're training together, an enormous amount of the percentage of the time spent is really developing the individual capacity. And yes, there is this team dynamic layer, for sure, but the All Blacks will always beat GPS first grade team, right? Regardless of their team dynamics, purely on raw individual capacity. I have found that an interesting question to reflect on. How good could I be, and how did this ladder into the team? And then the second chapter, I came back and started a digital marketing company with some mates of mine. Thought this whole internet thing isn't going away.
Here to say.
So in 2005, decided we'd kick that off, and that business is still going with my business partner, Blue Wire Media, Adam Franklin, up on the sunny coast. He still runs that, and which is really cool to consider. You know, that was 2000. So
20 years.
20 years, and 20 years on the 7th of January. What a milestone.
That's significant.
That's really cool.
20 years in digital media, in marketing. Yeah, huge.
A lot has changed.
Yeah, of course.
I got really fascinated in the people development side of things with the business and leadership, and I always had been that way inclined anyway. But to me, that chapter sort of gets defined by a question, which was, how good could this team be from a system, structure, process, leadership standpoint, team, the team dynamic, how do we recruit? Or the whole people experience just really fascinated me.
Yeah.
That journey in 2016, I've hit this period that I've come to call my crucible. I had my second daughter. She had silent reflux, so it was up and down every 45 minutes. I had a shoulder operation from throwing a ball as hard as I could for 20 years. That was way more painful than I'd expected. I'd spent 6 weeks prior to her arrival upright on the couch trying to sleep. It's pretty tough going. And then at the same time, my father-in-law was in hospital with leukemia. My own dad had died from a brain tumor. Perfect storm, right? If you think about it, a crucible, by definition, is like a vessel that gets exposed to extremely high temperatures to reform or reshape metal, ultimately, and purify it. I think at that period, when Dad died, he was 66 when he died. His folks had been 98 and 93. So there'd been this expectation of longevity. And for me, that was a big look in the mirror moment. And what am I doing? Why am I doing it? And that led me down the path. And it was around that same time that I got introduced to psychological flexibility. I'd had a fair bit of experience with psychologists through sport and personal life. I'd always been intrigued by it, to be frank. And then got introduced to psychological flexibility, and that just joined dots for me. It was Western science validating millennia-old traditions of mindfulness and acceptance practices into a very neat model that didn't throw out all the goal setting and things I learned, but also added these extra dimensions to it. Been a fan of philosophy, religion, stoicism, all sorts of stuff for a long time. And here I was with a evidence-based World Health Organization model that actually ties it all together.
How much of that psychological flexibility was there at the time?
Pretty much zero. When I think, actually, very, very little. Most of what I felt I was taught looking back was very much around harder, tougher, stronger. Eliminate stress and pressure, set goals, chase them, and go.
Yeah, almost like whatever it takes, just get there.
And very much this idea that to show weakness in inverted commas is not acceptable. You don't want to show pressure. So how do you deal with it? That seemed to be the mode of the day. It wasn't until I read Michael Johnson's book, and it was 6 months out from the Olympics or 4 months out from the Olympic selection as to whether I'd make the team or not. And in this book, he said one of the things that got him into the gold, he won the 2 gold medals in Atlanta for the 200 and 400 meters sprints. The difference was when he began to own the goal. And to accept that, he kept deflecting the question, deflecting. Are you chasing two goals, Michael? Are you chasing two goals? And he said, finally, when I actually accepted the pressure and accepted that that actually was what I wanted, then I began to be able to work with it. And that was interesting because it really changed my narrative at that point, in these final little bits to actually say to people, yeah, I'm really hoping I make the team.
Yeah.
It seems so fundamental, right? But up until that point, I've been, oh, yeah, we'll see. Yes, I'm hoping.
Almost like a protective mechanism when we'll see, like it's out of my hands. Not that then you're choosing yourself as a selector, but to actually put it out there and say, yeah, this is what I would like.
This is what I want. And so that was interesting. And that was probably the first time I'd come across a mindset of acceptance, and really that's what the science shows as well nowadays, is that to learn to work with the fact that we all experience, the one thing that we all have in common is suffering. We all have fears and doubts and frustrations. Yes, we have hopes and dreams and aspirations, but a lot of what I see and certainly have experienced in my life has been very much focused on the fear, on the hopes and dreams. And if you make it big enough, you'll be drawn towards it. But actually, how do we sit with the discomfort? And how do we bring the discomfort for the journey with us? These millennia-old practices of acceptance. And
yes,
it's a part of the yin yang of our experience, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. I love it so much. I'm involved with the Goddess in the Boardroom program. We've got to get out of our minds and into our body and be really aware of the self-talk and bring it into our body. How often are we just walking around this world almost like a disconnected body and mind rather than integrated in those feelings, even acceptance, all the emotions? Where do you feel it? How are you experiencing it? How can you regulate it? The mindfulness, the body and mind connection. People call it woo-woo, like it's some crazy thing, but isn't it just how we're wired and created as humans?
I sit here and I feel an elevated heart rate, slightly sweaty palms, and energy through my whole body. And the questions showing up are people going to be interested? Will they listen? Is this valuable?
Yeah.
I've recognized that this is the price of entry to doing what I deeply care about. I talk about this in presentations and trying to own my lived experience of doubt and fear in service of the fact that this is actually the one thing that we all share. And so how do we connect at that level, given that your hopes and dreams and aspirations are different to mine? But I can nearly certainly guarantee that if I name a few emotions, doubt, fear, frustration, sadness, anger, resentment, we'll capture nearly everyone will have had an experience of that. Yeah. That's what we connect on as humans, in my opinion.
Yeah, mine too. And how often you hear these phrases, leave the emotion at the door or don't bring the emotion to the workplace. I kind of really fight up against that in a way. I think to be able to regulate our emotions so we can have real conversations, but to express it, to feel, to acknowledge, to express our emotions and manage them is a huge human skill that AI will never be able to take over. And it's critical. We don't want to leave it at the door. We just want to be able to manage and express it. What are your thoughts with that?
Yeah. I mean, you need to learn to bring it into the room with you.
Yeah.
And have it sit with you while you deliver what really matters to you. And the interesting part around that is that there is a direct correlation between how much we care and how much of this stuff shows up. It's not because we're weak or broken or inadequate or something is missing that we feel and experience these things. It's actually a sign that we care. So in fact, the more we care, the more likely it is to show up. That explains my Olympic experience of landing in the village, assuming I had a stomach infection, and it's stopping the day I left. It was a physiological response to how much I had built this event up in my mind.
Wow.
For 16 days. And the physiology was, I cared so much because this was everything I was about. It had been 11 years of enormous hard work, ups and downs, missed out on Sydney, made the team in 01, made the team in 03. And here I was, sort of dream come true stuff. Athens, in 2004. And still feeling like I was the last person selected on the team. Like that story, the imposter syndrome is with me all my life. Always felt like I was the last one selected on the team. Any team I made, I get up in front of an audience or on a podcast like this and wonder, is anyone going to be interested? It's in order to sort of change the relationship to it is how I see it. So it's not, and I would call my purpose in life is to change the relationship to suffering. Because if we can change the relationship to it, then it's not the enemy anymore. There's nothing to break through. There's nothing to fight. There's nothing to overcome. How do we bring it into the room with us use it as an energy source even to communicate a message that we deeply care about, or step into the difficult conversation or harness that in a way that is useful. Doesn't make it easy, and it certainly sounds simple, but not necessarily easy. But how do we do it? Because if we can, then, to me, that's how we get people to not even just to bring the best of who they are, but what I'm looking for in my clients is, how do you bring all of who you are to as many moments, as many days as possible? How do you bring all of it? Because we don't just need the best. In fact, we need the humanity of this as well.
And then through that, when you have the full life experience, I feel like that's when your fulfillment comes through. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what is it about bringing your full self and all of the experiences? What is the end game?
Have you read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning?
Yeah, I have.
One of the core premises of his work was this idea of movement towards wholeness. And I really love that idea. If you even know yin yang as a symbol, the white teardrop with the black dot, black teardrop, white dot, and recognize that is a lived experience, highs and lows, triumph and trial, love and suffering. It's all a part of who we are. So in the movement towards that, it's the ongoing practice of accepting that that's actually who we are. And if fulfillment is like filling a cup and it's taking all of you, then that means you need to accept it all, not just the shiny bits that feel nice. And when we care, all the other stuff shows up too.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And how often we are just almost programmed to push away the hard stuff. I had a conversation today with someone about expressing their emotions in front of their kids. What message does that give our children if the only emotion we allow them to see is when we're happy? I think there's a realistic thing in our workplace and in life where you go, where it's appropriate. And I guess then that's a bit of the grey because there's no guidebook on this. If you are completely in breakdown mode, maybe then you've got to seek some support to shift out of that way if it's not always
super important
working for you.
Yep.
But to allow the ebbs and flows of emotion and to express them, and almost from a workplace and with our families to go, right, this is part of the human experience. This is how we sit in the discomfort. Then this is how we find the joy as well. And it doesn't have to be so binary. What are we teaching our kids if we're really holding all of that emotion in? Because it's still there. It's just inside of us. And then, like you say, 16 days at an Olympics with this
it'll
pain.
find its way out one way or another.
Absolutely. Can you tell us more about the psychological flexibility? Because I don't know if that's a term everyone's familiar with. What can you share? Like, I really want to hear your take on it and more about it. I'm genuinely really interested in it.
Thanks, Cherie. The core visual that I love people to take away from this is, this idea that, on the one hand, we're not trying to turn people into brick walls, ultimately. Brick wall of harder, tougher, stronger doesn't really serve anyone, because if you hit a brick wall hard enough with a sledgehammer, it cracks. What we're trying to do with psychological flexibility is to help people become trampolines. So they can absorb the hits and bounce back, absorb, bounce back, absorb, bounce back.
I love that visual.
The truth is there will definitely be sledgehammers. We don't know when, we don't know how, but it's not a matter of if. So how do we prepare, and what are the practices that support us in developing you could use the term resilience as well. How do we absorb these hits and bounce back? Because they are the truth of what we all work with, particularly in a leadership space. You've got curveballs coming at you from the outside world. There's the inside world, personal life, work. I don't really believe in compartmentalization. I think, we're integrated. Perhaps we can keep things compartmentalized for a time, but sooner or later it'll bleed in. So what are the springs on the trampoline that help us to do that? And that's, from my standpoint, the top three would be relationships, work, and health. How do you manage all three of those? What are the ongoing practices that support those three areas of our lives? And of course, relationships breaks into, work, home, parenting, all the various relationships. But if we can nurture these areas, then generally people have a sense of well-being or resilience, or have the energy in the tank. The core of psychological flexibility as a model, so it was developed began development in 1982 with Professor Stephen Hayes. It has since been validated in World Health Organization trials in 2021 for clinical situations,
Great.
anxiety, depression, substance use, all sorts of stuff. That's not my game because I'm not a clinical psych.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated in how it gets applied in wellbeing and performance end of the spectrum. What has come out of that is a triangular model. If you visualize a triangle, in the bottom left, if you write open up, in the top of the triangle is be present, and then bottom right is do what matters. So that's open up, bottom left, be present at the top, and do what matters, bottom right. Open up is not so much about opening up to other people. Open up is very much opening up to our own experience of the tough stuff, the fears, the doubts, the frustrations, whatever. Be present typically comes with mindfulness, contact with the present moment. How do we come back to the present? Not necessarily to feel good, but to recognize that we still have a choice. So there's a lot of our reaction that we can't control. We have tens of thousands of thoughts, feelings, sensations in a given day. We have very little control of that inner world. And a lot of psychological flexibility is letting go or accepting that we have little control of our inner world. And then be present is about recognizing the choice. Given I have very little control of the world around me, I have very little control of the world inside me, how can I come back to the present to recognize, well, what choice can I make here? And then ultimately in that bottom right of the triangle, the do what matters, it's connecting to the behavior that leads you towards the things that matter to you. And that directionality is really important. So rather than positive and negative behavior, I tend to talk a lot more around towards and away behavior. Primarily because behavior generally is contextual. In some settings, to do what matters or taking a performance behavior may be to speak up. In another setting or moments later in that same setting, the performance behavior may be to sit still and listen. The only thing that has changed is a shift in the context, whether it's the conversation or the content or what have you. So the towards is very much around, often towards behaviors come with a short-term discomfort, whereas away behaviors come with a short-term gain. So if I play out an example here, if we're talking about health, going for a run in the morning, the alarm goes off, what choice do I have? The bed is warm, it's cold out. The first couple of Ks of a run are always horrible and uncomfortable. Do I want to do this? No. There's a short-term benefit to hitting snooze on the alarm.
And staying in your comfy bed.
The long-term cost of that, if we continue to hit the snooze button, is that we lose our health. We lose what the health enables ultimately. So it's not even just health and fitness. It's like, what does health and fitness enable? Relationships, running around with children, grandchildren, connection to others, the physiology, psychology that all comes with, a behavior like that. On the other side of that choice is a towards behavior, which is, okay, I'm going to get up and go for this run. What that requires of us as humans is that we sit with the discomfort of getting out of a comfy bed, stepping into the dark. It's still dark. All the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations all show up. You pull on your shoes. It is uncomfortable for the first K or two. But then the long-term benefit of that is that we feel good after the run. Very rarely do we feel great before the run. When you think about behavior change, it's about connecting to the long-term benefit. And what does that run enable then? Well, if I'm fitter, if I'm stronger, I'm sharper at work. If I've done my training this morning, I'm a better husband, I'm a better dad, I'm more focused at work. Everything benefits by this lead domino of getting out of bed when the alarm goes off. Our lives are made up of these millions of choices that we all make each day. How do we compound them towards and try to minimize the away moves that erode the progress that we're trying to make? It's also human to not get it right all the time. The other part I find fascinating about it too, Cherie, is that those two little pieces of the short-term benefit and the short-term pain, almost never is it an information problem.
Yeah. So what is it? Because we know, we're really aware it's going to give or take from me in these ways. What's missing for people?
Well, it's the willingness to sit with the discomfort and bring that for the ride. And it's our wiring that says we want to move towards comfort, which is natural, and we want to move away from pain. And so we have these inner worlds that provide both of these things. How do we sit with both of those, recognize them for what they are, be aware enough when they show up, and still make these choices that move us towards, not in some sense sort of perfection, but as an ongoing practice?
Yes, it's the discernment of the pain, because even if you're saying all this, the expression in my head just popped about the long-term game. It really is so true, because you go, short-term, I'm going to say no to these things, but long-term, what is it that I'm actually saying no to or yes to?
I love that as well. A lot of people talk about, I need to say no more is a really common thing that comes across in my coaching sessions with clients at a senior level. But it's actually, well, yes, maybe you do, but a part of it is also getting really clear on what you're saying yes to.
Yes.
Because the other option when it comes down to communication of this stuff is that it can be far easier to communicate the yes. Hey, I'm going to go to this gym session today because I know I'm a better leader or executive or what have you, as opposed to, no, I can't see you. It's like, yes, I'm going to the gym. This is super important to me. Can we have a conversation about whether what you're proposing to me is more important or less important? And then we can prioritize.
Rather than saying, no, I can't, that feels like you're letting people down, or there isn't the people pleasing and
Yes.
not truly speaking what you desire, or being clear, and you don't want to let people down. You don't want to be a good leader for them. Actually, when you say, I'm saying yes to this form of exercise or time for me to rejuvenate, get my energy, regulate or ground, whatever part of the day you're in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even just a project, right? Hey, thanks for knocking on my door. I'm working on this at the moment. This works up or down an organization. Does this need to be more important than this? Tell me what you've got and I'll make a decision if I have the decision-making power or in the communication up. Do you think this is more important than what I'm currently working on? Because that enables a manager or a leader to say, oh, yeah, keep going on that.
Yeah.
I'll come back to you.
It's such a helpful question too. I find I can be guilty of everything's important. Kind of like I just, let's go. Everything's really exciting and let's do it now. Why wait? It's such a superpower and such a kryptonite at the same time. When somebody says which one's more important, it stops me in my tracks because I then actually have to think, okay, let me think about this. Nope, we'll stick with this. It's great for me because otherwise I'm probably running too fast and need to take a breath and slow down to get clear. And some people, what I've noticed from a leadership perspective, if people are working in a team with me, then really hard for them to know, well, where do we start? And then they feel like maybe they're not contributing or letting people down. And just that question is so helpful for everybody, whichever end of the receiving or giving that you're on, the clarity, what is most important? If I say yes to this, what am I saying no to, or vice versa? Such a good clarity question.
And in the framework of psychological flexibility, it's a question to help get clear on what matters. And then I'm going to do what matters.
Yes.
So what matters here? What matters in this context? How do I make sure that we're both across what matters here?
Yeah.
And that I've got this right and that you've got this right as well. Okay, cool. Well, let's do that.
There we go.
Yeah.
That's so great. I love that triangle. It's fantastic. It's really powerful. How has this changed things for you personally?
The triangle or
transitioning from the sport and then to where you are now, or even just in current day life, like the sport, as exciting as it is to go, tell me more about the Olympics. Like that's also a different chapter years later. You're in a different part of your life now. So on a day-to-day basis, how does it impact the way you lead your business, run your business with your family?
One of the interesting parts about this triangle is that all of them are never-ending practices.
Yeah.
And I changed my approach last year away from goal setting to practice setting.
This was on your email. I received your emails on a Monday, and this was a great email. If this is where you're going now around the way that please continue. But I love that email. I forwarded it on to some friends. It was fantastic. So we must put in the notes to sign up to your Monday emails because they're great.
Thanks. Just this idea that everything that is important is an ongoing practice. Relationships, work, health, finances. I mean, really, if you boil it down, ongoing practices. So getting clear on what really matters in the first place, I think I've continued to evolve and sharpen my understanding of what really matters to me. And then the practices around acceptance of whether it's anger at my children, which is something I really want to work on this year. I don't think I'm a bad dad. I actually think I'm doing a great job. But there are points in my day and my week where I would prefer to be less reactive. And there's always work to be done. How do I continue the practice of learning to sit with it and still making choices that express love and care, boundaries, and not at the cost to myself, but how do I keep finding this sort of neutral path? And then the other part for me around the be present thing is I over the last year or two, I've really doubled down on meditation
Okay.
and mindfulness practices. And I think one of the benefits of being a coach is that it forces you to be accountable to the things that you need to practice what you preach.
Yeah.
And so I love to start every coaching session with mindfulness. I make an effort to meditate ideally twice a day. Some days it happens, some days it doesn't. That's okay. But the recognition that it's a practice I want for the rest of my life. It doesn't matter if I miss it today because I can go again tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I don't want to let it go too long without getting it. Recognizing the value of that means that I'm far more likely to adhere to that as a change. I've really benefited from that. So back to your question of how has this triangle impacted my life? I mean, really meaningfully in lots of different ways, and really shaped my understanding of what I want to bring to the world, getting clear on what really matters to me, my values, love, gratitude, humility, exploration, contribution. How do they get expressed in as many moments as possible, whether that's in a relationship or work or a conversation like this one? The micro really does reflect the macro in that. All these micro choices. And the other thing for me too, Cherie, sorry, is just this idea, trying to decouple who I am from what I do. And so understanding that I play a lot of different roles in my life, but that's not necessarily who I am. If I take my purpose and values, purpose being change the world's relationship to suffering, values being love, gratitude, humility, exploration, contribution, and suffering, I sort of bunch up I've labeled it Toby because it's a part of who I am now. But, that's the imposter syndrome, anger as a parent, what have you. How do I express each of those things through the roles that I'm playing in these moments per day? And so how do these, rather than the roles I'm playing being the definition of who I am, they become an expression of who I am? It's a set of practices, never-ending practices. And
so good.
we're back to it.
I love it so much. Even now when you've summarized it and said about your purpose and your values, you'd already spoken those, I think, inherently through this conversation, which to me is so much power, working with individuals and coaching for them to be clear on their values and how it is they want to show up in the world and the human they wish to be rather than what we wish to do.
Yeah.
And doing is the vessel of allowing that to come to life, isn't it? Sometimes I feel like in our society, we've got an opportunity to flip it the other way around. How often we even, the default of, hi, what do you do? Where do you, and just to be able, how do we reintroduce ourselves in a more meaningful way? I remember probably just becoming a mum and then a slight detour in the career at that time on maternity leave, just to have that moment of like, who am I without this job that had defined me for so long? And I had all of my ego and all of my identity was swept up into this long-term career and job, which served me mostly well. Who am I? And then as the chapters of life change, keep observing and asking, inquiring that answer because it's always evolving. It's fascinating how we don't have enough of that emphasis, which is the work you do. It's the work we do, collectively. How do we keep bringing that awareness back to who are you as the human? And I love Ben Crow talks about the human being versus the human doing. Who do I choose to be in this moment for all the different aspects of our life? Not the binary of the good and the bad, the black and the white, but all of the human expression is all welcome. And when we embrace it, it's just a fascinating ride. Not always easy.
No, by no stretch.
Possibly more fulfilling because we're just more awake to life.
Yeah, the full spectrum of experience, for sure.
Sometimes you want to push it away, but it's no, not at all. Yeah.
Well, Psych Flex as an evidence-based calls that experiential avoidance. We try to avoid these internal experiences and it is a natural part of life. It's also super important in times that we do avoid pain and we do avoid danger and all that kind of stuff. We probably wouldn't be here if we didn't do that.
And it's recognizing, what do we say, like the prehistoric brain that's looking for threats and fears to keep us safe. These days, what we now look at, the unsafe environment is often the emotional unsafety, isn't it? And realizing that actually we're still relatively safe. Like it's just that we've put these walls up and go, oh no, that's not safe. That doesn't feel good for me. If we don't allow the discomfort to come in. How often, just on reflection, the real lessons we learn about ourselves in life don't always come from the joyful moments. They come from the harder moments or the challenging or whatever label we want to put on. But the the black part of the yin and the yang potentially,
I couldn't agree more. There's a white dot in there for a reason. And I think, certainly, and I've spoken to quite a few athletes about this too. The human experience is to look for the black dot on the white page and try to make that black dot smaller. And doing so, you zoom in the focus and all you've got left is just trying to refine, expanding the awareness and understanding and appreciating all the other stuff that's going on around us. That's part of the challenge too at times, I think.
Yeah, it's so true. I've just got that visual of the yin and yang in my head now. I'm like, yeah, why not focus in on the black? But what is the white dot in that black? What can we learn from those experiences? I love that way of seeing that in life. It's not about the toxic positivity of going, oh, this is a great thing when things are really feeling challenging. But
Yep.
what can I take? What can I learn? Maybe it's after the fact. But yeah, and that's where that being present is so critical, being present with what's occurring. We did this exercise the other day and it was reminded me when you're saying about the different types and the suffering, calling it Toby and the names. And we created this little mud map of, you think about people talk about business all the time. Have you got a board or a board of directors? In our own minds, the different thinking patterns that we have or the little personalities in our mind, like imagine we mind mapping all of and then naming them. So this was part of this process we did at Goddess in the boardroom and like, okay, if you're the CEO of your mind, but who are some of the characters or like the CFO, and I've got the CFO, Frankie. Frankie's probably on her third warning at the moment, but then linking to the thoughts, positive, I'm going to say positive and negative intentionally here, but what are the things that some of the patterns that are really serving us? And what are some of those patterns of thoughts? So as you say, thousands and thousands of thoughts that is just so habitual, we don't even recognize we're thinking them so often.
Mhm.
When I'm talking about X, I know that I can go into a bit of a funk. Or over here is really when I come alive when we talk about that topic. It's fascinating to then like name them and give them this personality.
Yeah.
So when those thoughts start coming in, it's not around putting them down or the shame of it. It's kind of almost personalizing and going, right, well, if this was a real person in your team, you wouldn't yell at them going, you're an idiot. Why did you do that? Hopefully not. But, it's like the kindness and speaking to yourself with that self-love and awareness. Like, okay, well, how else we can look at this and rewiring our thoughts. But yeah, fascinating. I don't know if you've ever done that. It was a fun little exercise.
Well, I mean, that's a very specific part of the ACT framework, which underpins psychological flexibility and labeling your thoughts, right? Labeling those experiences or those patterns. And I love the question in PsychFlex, which is this useful to me? Sometimes it is. I mean, the red alert as you're stepping onto the road without having heard the car that's coming and suddenly you step back and you realize that you just had missed the car. Like that is incredibly useful to you.
Very practical.
But other times it's not,
Yeah.
when you're stepping into a room or boardroom or a presentation or what have you, and suddenly the alarm bells are going. Is this useful to me? No, not necessarily. This is where gratitude becomes really interesting. I have been reasonably good at being grateful for the things in my life and the bits external to me. What I realized a couple of years ago was it was time to turn the gratitude to the man in the mirror. How can I express gratitude to these experiences? Say, hey, thank you, captain of defense or the risk management role, or how can you be genuinely grateful to those experiences? Gratitude turned inwards can be, in my experience, some of the hardest gratitude to wrap your head around.
Yeah. You know what? I haven't really had a conversation with people about this because you're so right. We talk about our last episode of Lead with Courage podcast at the end of 24. It was with a guy called Cooper Chapman, and he talks a lot about gratitude. We had a huge discussion, and it is literally part of just who I am as a daily practice. And I think really amplified when our daughter was born and in hospital for a long period of time. That was really when I personally felt the impacts of gratitude in a dark time rather than just when life is really great. It's easy to find those sparkles, isn't it? And so it has been just who I am now and part of our family life. And how often we do put it to the external, which makes sense too. There's validity there. Too often, many humans struggle to look within and find the self-love, the self-compassion, the self-gratitude, unless it's become a practice. So often it's not. If you,
Hardest place to look is in the mirror.
Isn't it?
So often, yeah.
Yeah. Until we actually practice it. We were literally talking about this last week. In 2008, a coach who is still a very dear friend of mine, who I co-facilitate this program I keep referencing, she said to me, I was going through a divorce, and she was saying, you got to look about a bit of self-love and write a list of the things you love about yourself. And I just struggled. I just couldn't do it, to the point where I had to ask a friend, what do you think about me? So that I could get a little bit of validation externally, which clearly is not
It's tough,
but
isn't
you
it?
got to start somewhere. It was tough. It was really tough. And I'll never forget it. Now, through practice, not because I'm anything special, but through practice, it's something that I've really established. For many people, like, no, 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 I can't say good things about my physical appearance or my personality. We can talk about what we do for others, but not necessarily who am I at the core. I think about from a parenting lens. So what if our children were saying that they couldn't see those things for them? We'd be distraught. You're like, here's your list, but we've got to. I think there's such an importance to be putting that practice in for ourselves, to practice that and genuinely believe it.
I think the belief comes, I don't know. Yeah. I'm yet to sort of figure out whether or not belief comes later or whether it's just the ongoing practice.
Yeah.
There's an interesting story in the acceptance that this is how I feel it. Like sometimes that's okay. And that's okay. I'd like to look somewhat different or whatever it might be, that it's okay to think that. And there's a really interesting story in Buddhism that I love, which is Buddha and a demon, Mara, who's sort of the demon of everything awful, have this cosmic battle, and Mara goes away. Buddha walks away unscathed. A little while later, Buddha's at home, gets a knock at the door, and he goes to the door, opens the door, and there's the demon Mara standing there. He says to Mara, please come in, and treats Mara as a revered house guest. So welcome back. Pours Mara tea first. Mara sits at the head of the table. Eventually, Mara goes away. And this doesn't happen just once in this enlightened being's life. Mara keeps on knocking, and these difficult, unhelpful thoughts, I think this is a big part of ACT and PsychFlex as well, is to recognize that it's okay to have them. You don't have to respond from that place. They're going to keep on knocking. We may never feel content with how we look, what we say, what we do, or how we parent. There'll be something that we could have done better. Right?
Absolutely.
So how do we sit with the fact that I'm okay, you're okay, we're okay? It's really hard.
Yeah, it is. It is. And do you think that there's so much of it that I feel like we're in such a binary environment where it's like either or? So it's either it's perfect or it's not enough. And so when you're saying around that, it's okay to still want to improve something. And I couldn't agree more. There's still ways that you might look in the mirror and go, oh, I appreciate this about myself. And I'd also like it to be stronger or, more resilient or whatever it may be. And the two can also, like, to have both opposing thoughts at the same time is almost the goal, to be able to acknowledge what is and still have growth mindset and want to grow and improve. Yeah, the two can coexist.
Well, you're back at yin yang again, right? Like
Yeah.
actually seeing that as the lived experience and the whole of everything.
Yeah.
The minute that we try to not acknowledge that stuff or dismiss it or push it away, or we spend an enormous amount of time, money, effort, resource, relationships, health, there's huge consequence to just perpetually pushing and getting rid of that. So how do we learn to sit with it?
Yes. Otherwise, that Mara is knocking. Mara doesn't knock anymore. Mara's living in the house. Yeah.
Mara kicks in the door.
Yeah.
Sooner or later.
Wonderful. If we go back to your goals and habits at the beginning of the year, can you share a little bit more around what tips? It's still fresh in the beginning of the year, but even if we're in the middle of the beginning of the year, middle of the year, goals and habits can be refreshed at any time. What takeaways from that email and the way you're doing your goal setting and habits can you share?
Yeah, perhaps a worked example might be the easiest way to highlight it. The way I approach this year is to consider purpose and values. In light of that, go through, say, in physical health as something I wanted to explore this year. What is my long game?
Mm-hmm.
So what is the game that I want to play for the rest of my life? For me, that's, being fit enough, strong enough, mobile enough to run around after grandkids, say.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not they arrive in that time horizon, that is my long game. Cool. Based on that, what practices now in this week, this month, this quarter, this year will help me either support, maintain, or improve the various aspects of physicality in order to do that? one thing I'm working on this year is to get more aerobically fit. Last year was very much about strength and trying to recover from injuries. This year I want to add in, getting a bit more aerobically fit. What are the goals then? I might want to run 10Ks or every fortnight with my brother. Cool. The practice then is this weekly cadence of riding a bike 3 times a week, garage at home. How do I assess where I'm at right now? That could be using a wearable. It might be going to do a max VO2 test, or you just get started.
Yeah.
What's the plan? I punched into Chat GPT. Hey, Chat, I want to get more aerobically fit. I've got 20 minutes 3 times a week. I've got an exercise bike downstairs. The 20 minutes has to include warm up and warm down. Can you please deliver me a progression? I'm really into maximum aerobic function training. Can you give me a progression based on that?
Brilliant.
And put it in one page. Ring, 15 seconds later, I have exactly what I need.
Brilliant.
So I've got my plan. Then what's the toolkit? I need an exercise bike and a heart rate monitor. Great. What is the system and structure? I'll diarise it. And what is my support and accountability? I'll talk to my wife about it. And we'll organise our diaries around it for drop-offs, pickups, all that kind of stuff. When am I going to do it? And I actually think that all of those things are what you need to know your long game. Then you need to drill it back to what are my practices that support that long game. The goals are really an outcome of delivering on your practices. And one of the things around practices that I really push with my clients is to lower the bar. Stop trying to expect that an exercise session has to take 1 hour. That's how I used to be wired too. I had to do perfect reps and all that kind of stuff. I've really had to unwind a lot of that because otherwise you're left with your binary thinking that you were saying. It's an hour or nothing. You could walk around the block for 5 minutes and that's infinitely better than doing nothing.
Yes.
Lower the bar. What is the smallest amount that you think constitutes a run or some aerobic exercise, and do that. If you think it's 10 minutes, aim for 5, 3 times a week. If you think you need to do it daily, do it 3 times a week, aim for 5 minutes, and then own that and deliver on it. Because you're playing a 20-year game, 40-year game. You don't have to deliver on it today.
Yes.
If you develop those practices and recognize that and the slight distinction for me between practice and habit and routines is practice to me just feels a little bit more adaptable. Whereas a habit is I train Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or a routine is I train Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It feels very time bound. Whereas practice to me is I train 3 times a week. And if it's Monday this week and Tuesday the next, that's okay.
More flexibility within it.
Just a little bit more adaptability of the plan. Lower the bar so low you can't fail, which seems a bit counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But I think is really what is the smallest first step? And even then, how can you do one? I put this challenge to a leadership group the other day is rather than setting up a group training environment, because they were all saying, we all need to be fitter. And then we thought, well, maybe there could be a group training environment. Let's figure out some days and do all that. And I was like, no. Just do one. Just do one session together and see if it works. Lower the bar, because otherwise you get lost into the logistics of perfect planning or perfect execution, and all of a sudden nothing happens. How about you just do one session tomorrow? What is the next action you can take in the next 24 or 48 hours that will get you started?
And then that momentum.
So, and the other part for me is last year I decided it was practices times coaching. I had like coaches last year.
Oh, for you.
Yeah, for me.
Yes, I remember you saying that. You had like all different realms of life, all different.
Bonkers. Yeah.
Too many?
It was great. Honestly, I think it was just awesome. I loved it. Had strength and conditioning, had business, had coaching coach, I had financial coach, I had speaking coach, I had all these people supporting me using minds, way more experience than mine or, further along the curve than I am.
Yes.
To me, that's like accelerating progress, avoiding pitfalls. And on a compounding curve, the one thing you don't want to do is stop compounding. You don't want to go backwards if you can. One of my challenges, particularly from a physical health standpoint, is it's the old Top Gun quote of "Son, your ego's running checks your body can't cash."
Classic.
And there's no point me training like an Olympian at age 45 and breaking myself, which is pretty much what I've been doing for the past 3 years. I said to my coach, mate,
what am I doing?
Every time I start, I stop, I get broken. I need you to really check me. I need you to make sure that you've got the progressions nailed and they're less than what you think I could do, so then I can rebuild this stuff, because I'm missing foundational blocks here. I've done a ton of training, but I'm not managing myself very well.
And then it comes back to that end goal, right? When you're saying in 20 years' time, you want to be running around with potential grandkids, you're not saying, I want to go to the Olympics again. If the goal was to go to the Olympics again, then maybe that is different strategy.
Very
But
different.
that isn't your goal right now. You've done the Olympics, ticked. And so, yeah, what is it all for? I think that question to keep coming back, what's the why? What's it really for? What do you really want? Sometimes answering that can be one of the toughest questions to answer. But once we've got that clarity, then yeah, what am I saying yes to edge me closer to that?
Often that's inherently fulfilling as well, back to your point earlier. Like, that is inherently fulfilling. In hindsight, I would say I went to the Olympics to try to feel fulfilled, you know, to feel as though I was good enough or something. And I got about 2 weeks of contentment. And then I dismissed it for 18 years. I really didn't talk about it until I started writing about it a couple of years ago. And mind-blowing.
That is mind-blowing.
But it is near universal. I speak to gold medalists, I spoke to a silver medalist, a decade of disappointment after an Olympic silver medal.
Wow.
Because the expectation was gold. Felt like bomb the gold.
Wow.
It's quite sad about how we operate in this respect, you know.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's mind-blowing. And for someone who is nowhere, anywhere, even close to the closest I'll ever come to Olympics is watching it. Oh, I attended Sydney 2000 as an audience
it was
member.
awesome.
Incredible. And but as a fellow Aussie, you're just cheering them on no matter what. Well, actually, no, we sit there and go, oh, they didn't get the gold. They didn't get the gold, depending on who it is and what the media puts on.
Yeah.
But you're just happy for people being there, right? But when you put it in your own lens, in your own life, that's different. Yeah, I can't even imagine the pressure and the expectation. It's not an overnight thing. Like you say, it's years. You started playing water polo when you're in high school. So it's years and years of your life absolutely sacrificing or honing in on that goal, using it. Yeah, sacrifice is a bit of a big word, but you know, the choices you make.
Well, I might have even said sacrifice at the time. So, Cherie, I think with perspective, I've come to really disagree with sacrifice as a word.
Yeah, okay.
Given that is something that happens to us. Whereas as soon as you recognize that there's a choice here, that I'm making a choice, that I'm choosing to not go out with my mates because I want to go to Olympic Games, particularly in the athletic world, I think it gets peddled way too hard. Yes, there are people who put everything on the line, you know, military, emergency services and that kind of stuff where, wow, that's really some binary outcomes in some of those situations. But for most of us, the sooner we recognize that we're making a choice here, the better. If I could only choose one thing out of Psych Flex, that would be kind of the recognition is, you know, open up to acknowledge what's going on for you, be present enough to recognize the choice and then make that choice. If there was only one word I could pass on to people out of this whole conversation, it would be choice. Because ultimately that's what it boils down to. Doesn't make it easy, doesn't make it simple. The choices that we make.
That's all we have. That's within our control always.
It is the only thing we have genuine control over, I think.
One of the values you mentioned was contribution. So I would love just to maybe round out our conversation today on, can you share a little bit about the CEO Sleep Out team? We're both going back for it again this year, which will be in June. And so for anyone listening and they're interested in being a part of it or to contribute or donate in any way, that invitation is always there. But can you tell me, what was that experience like for you and what's making you come back the second time as far as the Vinnie CEO Sleep Out and the contribution?
Yeah. One, I thought Vinnie's did just a beautiful job of not just talking about it, but helping us to experience some of the challenge of what homelessness means. One of those exercises that they got us to do was, you know, you have, I think it was $70 a week to live on. You know, you're in a community housing setup, so you don't need to worry about rent, but you need to show up fresh for your job, you need to shave and you need deodorant so you don't smell too bad. What are you going to do with your other, effectively $50 to eat for the week?
Price list we had to allocate.
How will you spend your money? What choice will you make here? Really confronting that sort of beautiful experience of having you immersed in it without ramming it down your throat, which I think must be such a fine line for charities to walk when the stories are so confronting. The other thing that I found really interesting was the triggers for homelessness. So there are so many. Domestic violence obviously being a huge contributor to homelessness, but also the almost incidental nature of what, like, it's only sort of tiny differences that all of a sudden, a kid breaks their arm, the $250 bill means that you can no longer pay the rent, and that's it.
Yeah.
I no longer have a home.
Yes.
So where I guess my preconception was big events must have happened to homeless people for them to end up on the street, and the drugs and alcohol and all that kind of stuff, and the mental health was really transformed, or the nuance around just how small the change can be that ends up with someone being homeless. And then the subsequent flow-on effect of, well, I mean, how would I go if I was on the street with my kids? Would I cope? I have the network, the support, all that kind of stuff around me. So it's, that was something that was really brought home for me as well. The other lesson that I really took from that whole night and experience was to see the human behind the homelessness, to acknowledge that, to go up and introduce yourself. I remember shortly after I walked past the guy lying on a bench in town, and I thought, I can't just walk past this guy anymore.
Yeah.
And I'd had my water polo ball under my arm because I'd just done a presentation. I went up to him and said, "Hi, I'm Toby." And he said, "Oh, hi, I'm..." And I was like, wow, how many times is this person not seen in a day by thousands of people walking past? That was the other piece I really took from it, the humanity behind the homelessness, and understanding, there's a person here. It's not just a problem either. There's a person within it, and there is some power to do something about it.
It's huge, isn't it? We talked about the practices and the compounding of practices in a positive light in our lives earlier, and it's a similar thing, but in possibly the opposite direction, where just not being seen, not being acknowledged, not mattering to society in a way. We don't know people's stories. And when one person can acknowledge that person and speak with that person, I wonder what trajectory that can drive as well. You'll never really know the difference that you stopping and saying hello could have made for that person.
It's, probably a drop in the ocean, and chances are it doesn't change a lot. But the whole idea is that, if there were many of those interactions, then,
correct,
that would compound over time.
Yeah.
It may have. Yeah, that's true.
One of my favorite books, Conversations, she has this quote about, not every conversation is guaranteed to change your life, yet any conversation can. I really love that. I think that's a beautiful way to go through life. If we can bring a kind, genuine conversation, you never know what impact that's going to have. Shout out if anyone wants to come and join us, CEO Sleep Out.
Definitely.
It's a shameless plug for sure, but I've got to put it out there. It's an important way to contribute back to our community. And I think with the Olympics coming up, we've got a responsibility to make a difference. And Toby, I have absolutely loved being in conversation with you. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, the frameworks, your perspective. It's really been a joy.
Thanks, Cherie. Thanks so much for having me. I do love this work, and I feel like it's a privilege to share this. Thanks for taking the time, and hopefully people get something from it.
Well, I know they will, for sure. Thank you. And that's a wrap on this episode of Lead with Courage. Thank you for joining us. At Luminate Leadership, we exist to inspire and grow the leaders of today to create a better tomorrow. We believe that the people are the number one asset in every organisation, and we're here to support you in developing yours. You can see all the work we do on luminateleadership.com.au or across all of our socials. If you found value in today's episode, we'd love for you to follow, rate and share the podcast with others who are also passionate about leadership. And until next time, keep leading with courage.